in Australia. For us viewers here in the United Kingdom, we've witnessed these draconian lockdown policies on our own shores, and we've heard all about the situation in different parts of the world. But what is it really like to live in one of the most locked down cities in the world? That's the question I'll be asking our special guest today. Craig Schulze is an entrepreneur, author, podcast host, and investor. He was a multi-award winning personal trainer, owned 5 fitness clubs, set up 22 franchises, and built a 7-figure online business. You could say he's found his way to escape the matrix, which was a question I'll be asking today, how he feels in the current situation. He's published a book called You've Got One Shot, which is about educating and inspiring people to maximize their one shot at life. His One Shot Movement podcast has interviewed 150 of the biggest entrepreneurs, sports stars, thought leaders in the world to help people grow and evolve to be the best versions of himself. His vision itself was inspired with somewhat sadly tragic experience of losing his first son, who was stillborn, and the fact his son did not get one breath on this beautiful planet, let alone his one shot. And now from this tragic occasion, he's now over the last 18 months interviewing people as part of his Navigating the Fog and Thriving on the Other Side, a special series on the One Shot Movement podcast about the issues that we cover here on the Pandemic podcast. I was delighted to feature on Craig's show recently, but today Craig is here with us to shed some light on what's happening in Australia, and he's based in Melbourne, which is the most locked down city in the world, to get some first-hand insights about what's happening and some of the insights that he's learned from interviewing many of the guests that he's had on his show to give you a greater depth and perspective about what's happening in the world. Craig, a huge welcome to the Pandemic podcast. It's great to have you with us today.
Really looking forward to spending time with your audience and actually giving people an insight to what is happening here in Australia, because it is quite shocking.
Now, Craig, I think we share in common an entrepreneurial path and a desire to help other people to become the best versions of themselves. Tell us a little bit about, your work prior to this, and the steps you've taken to take charge of your own destiny and become free of the matrix, so to speak. And I'd like to then bring that back to how you feel about the current situation, having done that.
Yeah, look, I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, had businesses, you mentioned 5 fitness clubs, multi-award winning trainer, 22 franchises, built 7-figure online business, nearly an 8-figure property portfolio, and as you said, published book, speaker all around the world, and my podcast, my One Shot Movement podcast. So my journey is quite broad, and as an entrepreneur, you're always quite, thinking outside the box. And I think one of the biggest keys to, people in this situation here is that open-mindedness and the ability to critically think or ask questions. And that there has been something I've been really good at for a very long time. And my journey on this journey, or where we are now, is quite fascinating. I was given a documentary back in 2007 called Food Inc. And it was about big agriculture and how food was being processed from farm to the stores. And I was just blown away by this possibly happening. And from that point on, I started asking a lot of questions about how food, being in the fitness industry, was what you were consuming. And I moved then into probably my biggest business challenge, which was the global financial crisis, and looking at what happened there with the banking, the credit crunch. And I got really impacted, nearly lost everything there, where banks stopped lending money. So I couldn't sell franchise. I couldn't pay for fit outs for gyms. My gym clients were leaving then. And then the US dollar to Australian dollar change to a point, so my equipment costs went up hundreds of thousands of dollars overnight. So again, that led me into looking behind the scenes to say, how did all this work? And I started understanding how the big banking system and the government control was working. Then I built a 7-figure online business, which was all about getting out of the matrix. I was like, hey, I nearly lost everything during the global financial crisis. I'm not going to give these control freaks another crack at me. So I built business into 100 countries. I was selling products all around the world, but that led me down the rabbit hole of big pharma. So getting products registered, and you're starting to go, this is just herbs, nutritional supplements, vitamins, etc. You can't really say anything about it, but everyone's consuming this all day, every day. And I started meeting up with Nobel Prize winning doctors and having interesting conversations. And I started to understand how big pharma went. So we fast forward all the way to 2020, and I was booked to do a tour around the world, and I was just about to head to China, and then the global pandemic started, and that really goes, okay, we're into another situation. I need to look below the surface. So that's probably the nutshell. Just in regards to the book you mentioned about my son, I am inspiring and educating people to maximize their one shot at life. I have, prior to this, interviewed over 150 of the biggest thought leaders, sports stars, entrepreneurs in the world to help people. And it is a passion project of being put in that situation where, you know, you're watching your wife deliver your son and he's not going to be leaving the hospital. And that really changed my direction spiritually and just gave me a purpose in life. And that mission, that vision was like rolling out, and then we get into this situation. So I changed a little bit of a tact with this navigating the fog. So I want to help people understand by interviewing great guests like yourself what's actually happening, because you're not getting it from the news, and then helping people thrive on the other side, which is really more so what I'm passionate about. So that's a bit of a summary about me.
Thank you for sharing that, Craig. And I'm interested to pick up the threads of this and restore that part of the story in a moment, but to kind of contextualize the situation, having found yourself with the means to escape the matrix, so to speak, using all these different techniques and strategies you've developed to kind of self-empower yourself and build your own business kind of empire. To then find yourself in 2020 in unprecedented times under lockdown, and you know, Australia really has been under the microscope around the world, because it seems to be, you know, there's memes around the Western world saying that, you know, this is the largest open prison, you know, Australia's, which is quite something. You know, I think Australia's always been considered to be quite a free country. You know, but I'd be interested in your views. How is, firstly, could you explain to us or describe how the situation has unfolded in Australia, and perhaps give some context more locally to where you are in Melbourne?
Yeah, look, I mean, I live 4 kilometers from the CBD, so I can walk into the city centre. And Melbourne, I've lived in multiple states of Australia. I have travelled all around the world. So I've been in protests in Turkey after the biggest suicide bomb in history. I got caught and locked in a store there. I've been caught into a cult crisis in India. I was in Lebanon a day before that whole country shut down, and they lit the streets up. I was nearly stuck there for a month. So I have seen quite a lot. So for me, I always love traveling and treating the world as my oyster, but Australia's always been home. It's free, it's democratic, it's got beauty, it's got amazing people. But, you know, the she'll be right, mate, has probably come back to bite us a little bit here, that laid back culture. And I had to cancel 6 overseas trips before this. And Australia, it's been quite fascinating to see. And as I say, getting out of the matrix, a part of that was to get away from government and government overreach and government control. And over the last 20 months, I feel like a bird in a bird cage. I've gone 250 days. So I've been in lockdown 250 days. So someone that spends 20 weeks a year traveling the world, I haven't been able to leave 5 kilometers of my house for 250 days and counting. There's no end site near. I think it's 15 kilometers now. They gave us a few breadcrumbs. 1 hour exercise a day. Schools shut, businesses shut, 9 p.m. curfews. We had a stage where they wouldn't let kids even use outdoor parks. We have bubbles where we can catch up with friends that, you know, meet a certain criteria. I've got a holiday house about a 40-minute drive away I haven't been able to go to because I'm in breach of the chief health orders. And it's been quite frightening just from the overreach and rules. But I truly believe Australia has lost its way. It's lost its soul. It's not a country that I am proud of. I don't even, you know, I put on my Facebook recently, look at our Australian anthem. I don't even believe one word of that. I can't even, you know, it's shocking. And the media, and it's just been really a confronting time for 20 months. And just some perspective for your overseas guests, like, I've just explained some of the rules, but we are, as a country of 25 million people, in 20 months, we've recorded about 1,500 deaths, barely anyone that doesn't fit a criteria of vulnerable, aged care. We've overtaken about 60,000 cases, but in 6 months we're at 60,000 registered adverse reactions, and 810 of these deaths were equated to one government bungle, which was referred to as hotel quarantine. It feels like truly we are operating under nearly a communist style model, a regime, and governments are power hungry, ego driven people that just like standing in the TV and speaking to you like you're a children.
I mean, Craig, it's fascinating to hear you recount the story. I mean, we've obviously had Freedom Day here in the UK on the 19th of July, and I think people are quick to forget what we have been through, because just hearing you explain the lockdown, we've had most of that here in the UK too. And as you were speaking, I was kind of thinking, imagine having this conversation 2 years ago. I could imagine having this type of conversation with kind of a developing country where they've got unsophisticated political systems and there's dictatorial regimes in place. But no, here we are in the Western world having this conversation. And I every time I hear these stories, even though I've lived it myself, I think, how on earth has this happened? I would somewhat understand if this was a existential crisis, in that humanity was at the dawn of death and we all faced being wiped out from existence. But ever since the beginning, the evidence has been very clear that that's not the case. How has the response been amongst the Australian people? How have they responded?
It's a really good question, and I think it's grown over time. So I was, I'm not going to say I was one of the first people, but back in May last year, I drew my line in the sand where I said, "Hey, I know what's happening here. I've seen this story written before." So I started speaking out, but not in a way which it was just really thought-provoking questions to get people to ask questions, and then. You always get backlash. So there was business colleagues of mine saying, "Hey, Craig, I wouldn't do that if I was you, because you're going to cut half your customer base in half." And I said, "You know what? I've got a young family. I need my kids to grow up in a free country. And I would sacrifice everything I have to give them that opportunity." So I said, the risk reward, yes, I get it. It's been one of my rules in 20 years in business: never talk about religion, politics, or anything controversial that would cost you customers. But I drew a line in the sand then. And ironically, there's a lot of people behind the scenes that have probably grown a stronger level of respect. People are like saying, "Hey, your courage of coming out and putting your business on the line has really grown quite considerably." But back to your question, it's been quite interesting. Like, we had a situation about 3 weeks ago, I think it might have been the 1st of October, where an industry that had been semi-protected by government rules were mandated, which was a construction industry in Melbourne, which was 300,000 people were basically given they hadn't barely been locked down at all. They've been able to go and do their work, and they're all alpha males, and it's the first time they were put into a position, and they went and basically challenged their union and said, "Hey, you told us that we wouldn't face this," and they just stood out front of the union all day, and it just escalated to extremely heavy police violence, and it got to a stage where there was 10,000, 15,000 people just marching the streets for probably the best part of the week. They overtook our bridge that's 5 lanes each way and just flooded the bridge, stopped all the traffic, and it was really chaotic. But during that period, the police violence just escalated, where it was nearly like tanks looking cars in the streets. There was utilizing rubber bullets in nearly like shotgun looking guns pointed at you. There was the batons, shields, there was tear gas, there was a stage there where the government got a blackout over the CBD, so the media or anyone couldn't film what was going on, and it was chaotic. So that was probably the biggest moment there. But until then, there've been just, small groups of people just slowly growing and growing and growing. And I think now there's a lot more people that are waking up. Their backs are against the wall. We've got arguably this Friday 1 million people that if they're not experimented on, they will lose their job. And I say to everyone, this is probably the time where I feel the most we're on the edge of the cliff. There's a few court cases that may be able to give us a little bit of a reprieve, but it's a full takeover. Like we're a country, but we're not even allowed to cross borders into our states without special permits. So, you're not allowed to travel freely through your own country. It's frightening.
Do you think a turning point will come? I mean, we've seen some resistance in the United Kingdom. It's been growing, but it just seems as though it just feels like the more the resistance grows, the more mandates come down the line. What's been the sense in Australia?
It is like that right here now. I honestly believe that at the protest level, we would have 1 million people in the streets if they were given the ability to protest peacefully. But people going in there fearing for their life. Like every corner's got 6 police officers. It's, so it's hard to get even into the CBD during these, peaceful rallies, let alone that. And last weekend was our number one code in Australia. The day after the grand final, there was thousands of people celebrating and nearly doing a peaceful protest, like walking with their jumpers and Guernseys on. 24 hours later, people were being brutally assaulted from teachers, nurses, and the construction industry. It's complete and utter government takeover.
Wow, I mean, there's so many comparables. Now, what about things like you talk about experiment mandates. I know we have to be careful with censorship how we term these things, and vaccine passports or COVID passes. Are these things happening now in Australia as well?
Yeah, that's we're into that phase now where it's, they're really pushing hard with mandatory this. It's yesterday, you talk about Freedom Day, was Sydney been in lockdown since June. The vaccinated, or the upper class, as the government now refer to them as, it's full medical apartheid there. They're now got breadcrumb freedoms of being able to go to a restaurant and a pub, and do a few extra things, have 100 people at a wedding, etc. While the hesitant, or the people that are asking questions in New South Wales, they have to sit at home for 6 more weeks, and then they'll get a few extra freedoms there. But they are really trying to leverage this whole digital passport scenario for people to do anything in the country at the moment. So it's not quite there yet, even though, and there'll be, again, more pushback. But, I think the people at a stage, and you can't, if they don't have the right mindset, they're at a stage where they're like, I'll nearly do anything to just get my freedom and my life back. And, unfortunately, people are falling for the cheese in the rat trap.
No, absolutely. I see that very much. I mean, it's almost like in the UK that the kind of all of the stories around the health threats are almost dissipated, and it's just about how we can how we can exit this by clamping down on our freedoms, liberties, and rights, and capitalize on the opportunity. It feels very much like that. What do you fear could come next if this is left unchecked?
Well, I mean, at the moment, it's really more power. We're at a really interesting phase where there's been a few court cases. I would say probably in the last 30 days, there's been a bit of a movement of legal professionals that are now starting to challenge the laws in our country. And, there's some interesting scenarios that have been uncovered around our Constitution of 1901 connected to the monarch, and things that have happened since the 1970s of implementation of what they refer to as the Australia Act, where it's nearly like trying to circumnavigate our original constitution. And there's a lot of people challenging a lot of the laws around this, because some of the people that are giving these directives in their theory are doing it outside the law. So some of these are getting challenged, and they do give you a little bit of hope, because if you could get a reprieve there, you might be able to restore your human rights as a possibility, not people getting mandated to, experiment on themselves. And that might give us a little bit of time. But the government, we run into some elections next year, and we need to have a wipeout of the current two-party preferred model and a revolution of new political thought leadership. Effectively, that's the way that I can see a pathway forward. If you took out, there's actually a corruption case happening in Melbourne right now that's going to run for 5 weeks, of 20 years of what they refer to as branch stacking, which is, let's just keep it simple about going right into it, but it's like they're basically corrupting the political electoral system, where there's fictitious people electing, voting, and there's all sorts of crazy stuff. It's going to go for 5 weeks. But if they can't do that type of behavior, or what happened recently in America, I think we could have like a complete and utter overtaking of our major parties, because people just want their freedoms back, and they know that those two organisations are not going to give you that.
I think one of the challenges I've observed, Craig, is that this pervasive sense of state of emergency. If you look again, if you take any time to look through history, dictators, tyrants, they use and manufacture this state of emergency in order to gain greater control, power, influence, and to enact laws and legislation and mandates that you would never normally be able to get away with. And people, it's been said that people freely exchange their freedoms and rights for the illusory sense of safety and security. And I think we've seen a lot of that over the last 18, 20 months, however long this has been. I've lost track of time. It just seems to be pervasive. But in order to turn that corner, with the face of the challenges that you're seeing in terms of protesting in the street, and this almost fear on tap that we've been able to see. I mean, already in the UK now, they're talking about the worst flu season in history coming up, and it's just, people are just at the end of their wits, I think, with this kind of constant fear mongering. Do you think people will start to see through this? And because I do think off the back of this, we see the opportunity to create that kind of systemic change, and politically in the shell of the old. But my view is we need enough people to be able to push that forward. Do you think that time will come? Do you think more people are starting to see through this?
It's a really interesting question, and I'll answer it in two different ways. I'll just mention a couple of things that we could go back to. The police overreach, and they're nearly operating, out of control at the moment. They're supposed to be serving the people, and they're certainly not. But people are getting. We had our first political prisoner in a long, long time for incitement of basically encouraging people to not support the chief health operators or officers' directives. So they're like saying, hey, fight back against losing your job, like that. And they spent 22 days in solitary confinement. Wow. There was a video doing the rounds yesterday of somebody that attended a protest 6 months ago, got a knock on the door from police 6 months later saying, oh, were you at a protest? So people are like scared. And where I'm going with this, if I had to answer your question, I would say there's still we've got mask mandates. If you were doing a vote by people wearing a mask versus not, I would say there's 90% of people still walking around, and we're heading into summer with a mask on at the moment. And I would say half of those people by choice wouldn't want to, but they're doing it because they're scared they're going to get a fine, or the police are going to do police brutality on them. And it's quite confronting for someone like me that doesn't acquiesce to these directives. And I'm like, the bad person. Here he comes, the biohazards walking down the street because, you know, I'm not wearing a mask and not checking in and doing all the things that they're trying to enforce on you, to lead by example. And I think you know, if I was answering your question based on people wearing masks, we're a long way away from a movement of change. So it's hard to answer the question there, other than what I've seen in people that have woken up and they'll never return to following government. They'll never, that you could say what you want through the idiot box TV. They're just not listening. They're never turning back, and they'll be voting minor parties. They'll be, you know, a resistance for good for a long period of time. But, you know, visually, people are still 90% masked up around Melbourne.
I mean, the other fortunate aspect of history in the context of this is that history has shown us again that it doesn't take all of society to overthrow governments or to overturn policy. You know, there was a piece, I think, that it takes just 3.5% of society to stand for a certain law, and it can be overturned. Or some studies say it takes 10% of a society to believe a certain ideology, and lo and behold, the rest of the society will follow, which we've actually seen happen in reverse, actually, in terms of the effect that we're trying to create. But I think there is hope there that, you know, a small minority of people who are focused can create change. And my view is that the people are becoming more and more shocked by what they're seeing. You mentioned 1 million workers, prospect of losing their jobs. You know, many of those aren't going to take that lightly. And, you know, it doesn't just impact them personally, it impacts their families, their communities, the industries they work within, and all of a sudden you create a ripple effect, which I think I personally believe will be part of the next phase of change.
Yeah, just on that, I think change will probably happen when people start seeing adverse reactions impact them in their own world, because at the moment there's a clear narrative following from the media. So if you are a typical mainstream TV watcher and you believe the 6 p.m. news and don't question anything, you would be quite scared. Like, you would read that red tape going down, 1,500 more cases, go and put your mask on and dive into your house. Like, it's you know, so I think because we got so low numbers in deaths, and but from my perspective, I don't know anyone in Australia that's physically been impacted by the virus. I know a few people in America, but I've had out of my people that attended my wedding, I know of at least 5 people out of my 100 guests that have had to actually go to hospital and actually have a scan or a checkup or something like that. So I'm like, in 6 months, I've seen 5 people actually have to go and wheel themselves off. And there's a lot of people that I know that work, second generation. So my sister has got 10 people that have been impacted by experimenting on themselves. But, not many people really have been impacted by the virus here.
That's fascinating. Now, Craig, where I'd like to take this now is, you spoke about how you'd found a way to kind of build your own ecosystem to escape the matrix, so to speak. Bringing it full circle to this now, with what you've experienced over the course of this pandemic response, where do you see the opportunity now to actually reclaim that position, and what can be done on an individual level?
I think really ultimately everything always gets down to the individual to make that decision. So if they say, hey, enough's enough, or some people will just continue to go along to get along, but rest assured in another 10 years, there's going to be another situation like this, or it might be a different variety of that. And if you don't do something now, you're going to get caught up in the next one. So I made that decision after the global financial crisis. I did everything right, except for I didn't factor in that they could lock me in my own house. So sort of did it all right. But you really have to make a decision first of what does my future look like, because there's going to be some tremendous opportunities. Always has been on the back of global financial crisis. There's always been this wave of opportunities. So it's like, what do I need to do better? I need to work on myself, get my mind set up. I need to develop some skills, might be outside of your profession skills, make that decision, and then keep that open mind to ask questions. This is an opportunity that I can go down this laneway now. So I think people need to, if they've got a job, I would say find another thing that you can do to make some sort of money, because in this experience, if you lose your job, you lose everything. But if you found another way to make some extra money on the side that you can just chip away at, a passion project, something that you can start recession-proofing yourself, protecting yourself, use that money as an investment to build wealth that way. So, they're going to be small steps, but really you have to make the decision yourself. I could give you all the whiz-bang strategies I've used over the years, but when you make that decision, then it's like, what's my plan? Am I going to engage Dan and his 20 years experience in business, helping people to coach, mentor, guide you? But I think there will be some tremendous opportunities. You just need to prepare yourself best to make the most of it.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. And what I've witnessed in my time working with lots of different people from different backgrounds is that often it takes reaching a point of leverage where, the situation you find yourself in brings so much pain and frustration and anguish that you're forced to make a decision. You either continue as you are in pain, or you have to choose to take a different path. And I think a lot of people through this situation are going to reach that point of leverage where they're faced with that decision. You can either succumb to it and suffer, or you can step up and reclaim your personal power and make some choices. I personally reached that point of leverage myself over a decade ago, which led to me making certain decisions about how I'd live my life and to find my own way out of the matrix, so to speak. And I feel like I'm reaching that point again. It's a new point of leverage. But for those people now, who are particularly being faced by the potential job losses, etc., and these vaccine passports, it's not just about job losses, it's access to certain parts of society. I mean, we've seen certain parts of the world, Lithuania, where, even basic amenities are basically being withdrawn. So I think this point of leverage now is going to challenge people, but I think when people can find the opportunity and the gift within that challenge, there is an enormous amount of growth. What would you say to that?
Yeah, look, I always say to every person that I've had 3 conversations over the weekend that they're going to lose their jobs. And one's a high income earning person and said, look, I hate my job. But, another person's got, been doing all right, and they've got 3 investment properties. They're going to lose their investment properties. And I always say to people, if you can create business alchemy, which is turn nothing into something, that's what you need to be finding. So it could be going, this person has a great product, this person could be a good customer. How can I bring those 2 people together where you can create literally something out of nothing effectively? So I always keep looking out for opportunities, because people are going to have their backs to the wall. People are going to be losing their jobs, which will overflow. The second and third tier consequence will be losing their houses, losing their, that puts pressure on your relationships, and you lose your relationships, and it's just a bit of a snowball and spiraling effect. I would just say that there's going to be plenty of opportunities. You've just really got to go and look at it and make the most of it.
Is there anything you've done differently in the last few months as a result of the changing landscape that you could recommend to others to explore?
Even in my own investment strategy. So ironically, you talk about understanding what's happening. 4 years ago, I wrote about Bitcoin. About 4 years ago, 2017, I did these 2 massive big spills and said, if you understand the history of money, you understand what's going to happen in this space here. So I built a lot of wealth through investing in property. And I feel moving forward, property could become a bit of a risk investment in Australia based on what I'm witnessing right now. So I said, I'm going to have to change my investment strategy. Now, 4 years ago, I wrote about Bitcoin, and I said, incredible concept. And I bought Bitcoin at the time as well for about $2,000. But incredible concept, but if you understand how banks and governments and that work, this is going to be an absolute challenge, because there's no way they're going to let the People's Bank work. Now, at the time, you could very much argue that was the case. We fast forward 4 years, and we that industry looks like it's going to be like revolutionary in many different ways, but you can still see the noise of what's happening in that industry. So getting back to your question, about 12 to 18 months ago, I said, I'm going to learn and be an expert in investing and trading in Bitcoin. And one of the things that I did was tried to learn and got a mentor to teach me how to read the charts. So I'm very basic at it at the moment, but the point, and that to answer your question, I feel that, I think this is a good opportunity. Now I need to get upskilled in this area. And what's one of the skills that I can learn is understand the charts, understand some of the projects and decentralized finance and all these different parts to it, rather than just going blindly. And, I see that as a potential investment strategy for me moving forward, rather than going and continuing down the bricks and mortar property investment strategy. So that's something that I've taken on board in recent times. But, there's still concerns. I don't see it like in 2017 as I see it as volatile, but not risky anymore. Whereas back then I thought the biggest risk of governments are going to shut this down.
Well, I think there's still there's signal of threats around that, legal cases and whatnot. It's been fascinating to observe. But on that point, it'd be a nice way to segue. This decentralization of power, effectively, which is what blockchain and cryptocurrency in many ways is one pillar of decentralization of power. To that end, you've spoken about your awareness of some of the forces behind what we're witnessing that you became aware of in 2007. Ultimately, what is centralization of power? Is that a driving force behind it? What is your take on what's ultimately driving the currents here?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the bigger play here, and it's as I say to everyone, everything's in black and white. You just need to know where to find it. The book, The Great Reset, written by the president of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, wrote about this fourth industrial revolution. And if you plow through their website, you can start finding some quite fascinating things. And it's there, and you can then start looking at the connections of organizations that associate with the World Economic Forum. And then you look at the influence they have on places like the World Health Organization and the United Nations and, all these different summits that you start seeing, and you start seeing the same type of people having the same level of influence. So, there's a number of events that have been done, Event 201, Agenda 21, Agenda 30, these summits that they're doing where they're doing simulations of what you just doing now. So you can sort of see this heavy influence of big corporates infiltrating through these World Health Organization type of things that sound tremendously good as an organization that's supposed to be doing something for you. But then you see how that works in your own country and the influence that has in the own country. And then you look at who's invested into that. And then you start looking at the institutions that are giving the data to the chief health officers, and you're going, okay, where's that funding come from? So you start you don't have to look too far to find this. There's a court case that's going at the moment, and one of these institutions, one of the academics, they've tracked the best part of $60 million of grants for this research. Okay, but we never hear about the science. We never hear about the evidence. We just hear, I'm following the science. I'm following the experts. I'm following, and they use different, bodies to hide behind, users shields as well, like the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia. I'm sure you've got something similar. The TGA have advised this and they've approved this. So they sort of shift blame onto these other lever organizations within your government setup. And it's a massive spider web that if you talk about decentralized is a way forward, I would say that is centralized, a centralized governing model, which that is frightening in its own right.
Now, interesting on that point, you've talked about these pillars of power. We're seeing the protests towards nation governments, and of course nation governments should effectively have autonomy, but it's very clear that these organizations, these individuals, have enormous power over governments. But do you think some of the resistance should be targeted at these organizations? I mean, the World Health Organization, it feels like I don't think I've seen a single international protest or national protest against the WHO or any of these other stakeholders. Do you think we should start shifting our attention to these NGOs and central bodies?
Yeah, look, I mean, it would be great if people could. I really, I don't know how that can happen, whether it's lobbying at government level to get pushback from government towards them. That may be one way, but it's sort of, they're sort of like a protected species, I feel. They've got lots of funding from lots of powerful people, and whatever they say goes. It's our way or the highway.
You're absolutely right. The difference between the kind of public-private situation is the private, they hold money and power, and it's not by virtue of votes. They are unelected technocrats or authoritarian type leaders who are effectively washing their wishes over the world. In which case, I came to a realization just this week that the challenge we face is that at a national level, we have government overreach intervening in our lives in ways that we've never seen before, and many of us are seeing as unjust and against the fundamental principles of constitutions or just the kind of unwritten laws of humanity. Yet, how much of that influence is coming from outside the governments is the big question. But nonetheless, the governments are still the gatekeepers of the way these policies and regulation and laws are enacted. So on which basis, how do you see us as a citizenship pushing back? Because on one hand it's overreach, but on the other hand I see it's underreach, because they are challenging back this kind of technocratic elite. They almost are under that you see the memes of the puppets. It feels like they are, it's who's pulling the strings. So how do we actually on one hand push back against overreach while simultaneously empowering governments in some ways to push back against this kind of technocratic creep?
It's a hard question to answer, and one that's probably through, I sort of said to some colleagues of mine in this space, I said, if they didn't try and sell us a story. So it started about, let's see how many people could line up first. Then we'll drip feed some goodies like a beer and a burger and a sausage and then a few frequent flyer points. And then it was like, if you don't do this, we'll take this off you, and we'll see how many line up then. And then it's mandate. You do this or you're locked out as a second-class citizen. So when you go down that pathway, you get people going, gee, this doesn't sound right. I'm going to have to look into this a little bit more. But if they went down the normal thing, hey, there's a flu, it's flu season, we've got these new whiz-bang experimental injections, and everyone would have, there's no lockdowns or anything, and the numbers that we produce were no different to a normal flu season. I don't think people would have been asking questions, and they would have been distracted by the Olympics and their football and their family holidays and their jobs and everything. And a lot of people probably would have gone down the pathway of just volunteering. So back to your question, because it's been nearly like, this coercive based behavior, people are not just looking into this information, they're trying to look into political figures and their unsavory behaviors that they've been caught. So, our Premier of the state has been caught on 2 or 3 really, frightening, you would call it nothing less than corrupt type of activities. He tried to pass a deal with China through the back door into Australia, which would have given, which every world leader said, you can't do this. Or don't do that, and just secretly nearly gives a free hit of China in there. That all got exposed. And then there was this hotel quarantine thing where it looked like, he set up an investigated himself effectively, and then he got busted with a whole heap of deals there that looked quite, shifty, and then you've got this branch stacking thing, and people are now like knowing all of this information, that I think they're nearly like into a situation where they're backed into a corner where people are like going to say, hey, your time's up, get out of here. We elected people in for the people, and your time is done. You're operating for yourself and for other interests.
Absolutely. I mean, it certainly lifts the lid of trust on these institutions and individuals. And I think the more that happens, the more people start to see this for what it is. But interesting enough, I see this paternalistic pattern. We've seen this almost treating citizens as naughty children, and that the parents know best, and you'll follow the rules, otherwise you'll get in trouble, you get confined to your room, you could be sent, you'll be sent to detention or whatnot. But what's interesting about that pattern over time is actually what that does is also it unleashes the rebellious streak amongst the citizens. And I've seen a number of people say, you know what, I would have gone along with your plan to experiment on all of us, but now the way you're forcing us, it leads me to say no, because there must be something not quite right, and I won't be told what to do. And it's the actual reverse effect of what the governments are intending to achieve. Yeah, they're plowing on, and it's more the more resistance they get, the harder they push. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's sort of how I was trying to explain that there. Like, if they could have walked us all straight down the line, but they pushed the rebellious button.
Yeah. Now you've inspired a lot of people through your work over the years. It'd be really, really powerful to end on a kind of message of hope for the people. From what you've seen in Australia, but also what you're witnessing around the world, the people you've interviewed. What are some of the things that you think could leave people a sense of positivity, a sense of inspiration, or a sense of hope moving forward?
Yeah, look, I talk to everyone all the time about the green shoots of hope. So every single person can do their little bit, and their little bit could be simply of, waking up their neighbor. Their little bit can be simply filling in a petition that goes around. Their little bit could be writing to their, bureaucrat. Their little bit could be sharing this video to 10 other people. Their little bit could be, putting pressure back on the school when they say your children have to wear masks. Now is not the time to sit back on your hands. Now is not the time to say, I'm just going to let Dan do everything. He can do all the heavy lifting. Now is the time for people to rise up and do their little bit. Now, not everyone's going to have the courage to go into, what you would refer to in Melbourne CBD as a battle zone, where, you're getting, rubber bullets shot at you and tear gas bombs and paint guns. Not everyone's going to be brave enough to put their friendships and that on by posting online about, your thoughts around this. That takes. And sending letters and even just a phone call to somebody that, might be struggling. Just say, hey, it's really tough out here. We've got to keep the tribe together and motivate and inspire each other, because there's going to be a big, either two things are going to happen. The Great Reset's going to happen and life is not going to be like you want to live it, or the Great Awakening is going to happen and, life will be better than ever before. And I think the Great Awakening is worth fighting for, and everyone's just got to contribute and rise up, and, we can win the war.
Thank you, Craig. Now, for the guests at home, would you mind sharing where people can check out your podcast? You've got some amazing content as well, and the rest of your work. I know you've got lots of tools and resources that can help people in different ways. What's the best way for people to connect with you and your content?
Yeah, just simply on my, I gave you the links so you can put them with the post, but just my website, I have a lot of resources. Like I've got an ebook there. I've got 150 interviews with amazing people that can give, their strategies and skills and inspiration on that podcast there. But on my profile, I'm probably the most active speaking out about this stuff on my profile. So I have quite a following of people there. I don't sort of like have my I say it on that profile and then just put it across like 20 different things. I've just started a bit shooting a Telegram account as well, but yeah, I'm just trying to be a voice and continue to wake people up and, share good information. Like in this, one thing I will say that I found around this um, is I'm interested to help Dan get his stories out there. I'm interested to help someone else that's doing good things. Where in typical entrepreneurship, I'm doing this good thing, but I don't really want to help Dan because he might take in this scenario here, I need to help Dan. In this scenario here, I need to help this person. So I'm happy to try and introduce this person to help this scenario, because we are right at the moment, on the edge of the cliff, and we need to all lock arms all around the world, keep everyone, because you won't find this information out in the mainstream media, keep everyone well aware with what's happening. Independent news is growing at a rapid rate, which is a great thing, and let's just support each other.
Thank you, Craig. The times are changing. Thank you very much. And for those watching the Pandemic Podcast, please just take a moment of your time. If you're watching for the first time, just go to danjgregory.com/pandemic to join our mailing list, where you have the opportunity to find out firsthand about our future interviews with guests such as Craig today, to really help you stay engaged, inspired and educated, and find out how you can play your part in changing the world. So thank you very much to Craig and all of our audience today for tuning into the Pandemic Podcast. I look forward to seeing you in our next special podcast episode later this week. Thanks very much.